Welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with David V Stewart to talk about his new book, the Kickstarter for the book specifically, King Leper. Let me see here. You've been on, Mr. Stewart, you've been on the online spheres, especially the ones I've been inhabiting for quite some time. I think I met you online anyway through Brian Niemeyer, our mutual friend, and sort of you come on there. We've seen each other post. We've liked each other's posts. Very important for the health of the online world. And I noticed that you had a new Kickstarter for your third book in the series, King Leper. Could you tell us a little bit about your series and then about the book specifically, sir?
Sure. Hey, folks. All right. So King Leper is the book 3 in the Eternal Dream series. But as far as like a literary universe, I call it kind of a hydra. It has many heads. And that's because there's already, I think, 13 or 14 books that are roughly in this universe, including my most popular books take place in like a possible future of this, what I call the mainline series. But the main fantasy series, the first one is Water of Awakening, which here's a hardback of that. And then Needle Ash is part 2. This was originally released as a trilogy. Now you just get it kind of as one big volume, which is how really I constructed it. That was an interesting project because I had, for National Novel Writing Month, I think in 2017, I said, okay, we're going to plan and write a book in a month. And that's what we did. That was the book that I did. And everyone was like, you can't write a book in a month. I'm like, you've never written a book, so you don't believe that you can write things in like at a normal time frame. You can work hard. It took me, I think, about 5 weeks to like do the draft. And then I spent a couple weeks doing covers for it. And I wanted to experiment with, like a trilogy on Amazon. And so I released it as a trilogy, one book kind of for each act. But now I have it as a collected one. King Leper is the third one. It's actually the longest. It really is also a trilogy like Needle Ash. It's 3 books kind of stuck together. I think the hardback's going to come out to about 540 pages. If I push it any longer than that, it can't be printed through normal means. I have to go through some different printers. Some printers will do longer hardbacks, like 800 pages, even 1,000 pages, like a Brandon Sanderson kind of big old doorstop brick. But that would be at a different level. I really wanted to keep it at a level that I could publish it through Amazon later. So the paperback for Amazon will come out after the campaign. This campaign is to sell the hardback for people who want a jacketed hardback, like a traditional book you'd get at a bookstore. And then you have an option to get a signed hardback. There's 50 copies of that available. So I'm going to sell 50 of those. I don't think I'm going to have more than 50 if there's extra demand. I think we're going to cap it at 50. I think, if you make a promise, like I'm only going to sell this for a certain amount of time or a certain quantity, I think you got to fulfill that. And I don't even know, when I started this, I was like, will there be 50 people who want a signed hardback? Well, there's, I think, over 30 now after a couple of days of running the campaign. So that's encouraging. We met our funding goal day 1 within the first 24 hours. My funding goal was set up so that that's the threshold at which I'm not going to lose money at printing the books. So everything after that is me being able to have some kind of profit margin going in, which is great. So I'll be able to have a little bit of money to pay for the cover, which is by Jesse White. You can actually, I'm kind of small on the stream, but his art's always behind me. This is from a book he did with John De La Rose called Deus Vult, where he was the artist for the whole book and did a painted cover. Great artist. He's worked with Jonathan Pajot and a bunch of other people as well. So he did the cover for this in a 3-tone, which is, a little different. So everything looks a little different. And because of that, I went with a little bit more classical design than when I went with the last books, which are, to me, kind of mid-tens indie fiction style. And this is more of like classic fantasy book design, something you'd see from days of yore, which I'm happy with.
I've got the cover on the screen now.
Yeah. The the setup for these books, so people asking, like, is this a trilogy? Well, each book has a different conflict and a different set of characters doing that conflict. There's characters who reappear in every book, but the main protagonist is always a new character. It's kind of the way it's set up. So it's something kind of closer to maybe Terry Pratchett's Discworld, or something by like Jack Vance, versus what we're used to with modern fantasy, where every book in the series is like a continuation, a direct continuation of the one before it, or you're leaving off at cliffhangers. I know the indie fiction paradigm for the 2010s, at least, was to write a really long series where every book ends with a cliffhanger, and you're trying to make a 20-book long series and sell through it by never concluding your story arcs. That's not what I like to do. I like to have a book where when you buy the book, you get the complete story. And so that's what King Leper is. It's about a guy named Fulbert. He's the king of Ronia, which is a country near, I have a map behind me. It's the next country over from Ardaland. It's the next one to the west. That's Ronia. So they're neighbors. And he's got a terrible physical affliction, and everyone thinks he has leprosy. And he's not only, outcast from public life, but also from the sacred life. He can't actually take part in any of the rituals of the country, which puts him at a lot of risk. That's the A story. It's threatened, he's threatened by usurping nobles and things like that. There's a B story of a romance. The romance is a woman named Darlena, and she's blind. So the whole setup here is that who would actually have the potential to love me? Well, a blind woman would not discriminate against my horribly disfigured appearance. So he searches out for this blind noblewoman and said, maybe there's something here. And that gets interrupted by a bunch of people trying to kill him. In the meanwhile, you have kind of it's not even really a tertiary one. It's a second kind of main conflict. You're going to have Helga and company from the first book are going to come in and move the plot forward and provide a possible solution for Fulbert. Them pursuing their own goals of trying to basically cure Helga's husband of kind of a spiritual poisoning that he's been afflicted with since the first book. So that's the setup for King Leper. It has quite an epic setup and conclusion. I'm pretty happy to finally bring it to market. It took a long time in several different seasons and years to finish at least the initial draft, and then which I finished quite a while ago, and then I sat on it for a while because I wanted to do some revisions. And each time I came back to it, I had to kind of rework what I'd already thought of. But I think the final product is better for it. It's more complex, but there's more there too,
Oh yeah, like it's I'm working on a similar project, and like you go back there, then like you're working out at the gym, and then it's like, oh, I can do this and add such and such a thing to a
Yeah.
character, or they can have a mystic dream because everyone loves mystic dreams, I'm sure, or you can just kill a character, something that it's not done until you publish it, frankly.
Yeah.
Not that any of us here are suggesting that you revision forever.
Yeah. I've cautioned against that so many times. And I think there's a reason that Stephen King says, you should take one season to write a book. I totally get it.
Yes, absolutely. uh just don't never mind. All right. So King Leper is a part of a series, The Waters of Awakening. uh how much, if let's say I decide to buy a hardback, how much would I have to depend on knowing the other books to get this book?
Well, in my opinion, it's zero. But so you could just read it without reading the other ones. The characters are introduced, you get to know them, you get introduced to their conflicts. You don't have to know a whole lot about how they got there to figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I
Right.
think you don't really have to read the previous ones, but there's a lot of extra depth there for people who want to read some of the other books. Water of Awakening or Needle Ash, both of those will have obviously more character backstory, more event backstory. But there's also two other books that are in what I call the Legends series because I'm crazy. So they take place in a more mythological past. That's Crown of Sight and Ulshafal. Both of those are dealing with some kind of relics, some magical relics that are left over from this more mythic age that end up being pursued in this book. So those are also relevant, but they're there for people who want kind of the deeper lore and want stories that are a little bit outside of what you normally get in fantasy, even further outside, I should say, because Crown of Sight, which you can still get for free, I think, as part of the Corona Chan anthology, which is, you can still get that, I think, for free. Anyway, it's the whole idea there was, I'm just going to write the final act, the final battle of an epic fantasy. So that was the idea behind it. And how much of the conflict, how much of the characters can we get in that final battle, and how necessary is it to have all the other stuff? So I imagine I was writing, I don't know, like the last 2 chapters of a Brandon Sanderson novel. Turns out that's the best part, right? So let's just write the best part. And so that's what I wrote for Crown of Sight. And I liked it. And I think a lot of other people liked it. They liked that they can, it's part of these shorter books that I wrote that I call 2-hour books. Really, I'm just bringing forward in time an older kind of format that was really popular in the first half of the 20th century, which is what we would call like a novella today. But, Robert E. Howard would write at this length. H.P. Lovecraft, most of his really popular stories are about that length, to 20 to 35,000 words, let's say, or the Old Man and the Sea length.
Right.
But people like the idea of a 2-hour book. Oh, instead of watching a movie, I can read a book. And so that was what that one was. But a lot of people, I don't know, some people didn't like it because they wanted a tome. I'm like, okay, I have other books that are tomes. You could read the other books that are large tomes. They have a lot of exploration of the world. And then Al Shafalda is a tragedy. So most people don't read tragedies, and they don't really like tragedies in the classic mode. I don't know. It's not, in my opinion, a super popular format, but I wanted to write one anyway. That's another
People
one that I
don't have the
wrote.
taste for it.
Yeah. I paused writing King Leper to write Al Shafalda because they go to this opera, and that opera is telling this story that we read in Al Shafalda. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop and I'm going to write that whole tale. And that was 2020. That was way back in 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020. So
What a
after the
year.
election, I had originally planned on releasing it like December 1st, but then I was like, no one's going to buy anything right now. All right. The morale is just too low. So I just held off on it for a while. And after I moved back to Texas, that's when I went ahead and published it along with some other books. So fun little story with that one. And that was one that I knew, I was like, this is really not mainstream. Yeah, no one's going to read this. You know what I mean? I knew it ahead of time, but I have the option as an independent artist to write and publish whatever I want. And so I'm going to publish things that I think people ought to read and ought to like, as well as things that I think they will like.
Of course. I always, I'm being half facetious here, but I always was like, you can tell the plebs what to like,
Yeah.
and sometimes they may even agree with you. When I made that comment about no one having a taste for tragedy, it is kind of part of our world that, like, I'm a bouncer as a sort of day job, pays my rent.
It's a day
And
job at night.
exactly.
It's a day job
Uh,
at night.
it's a day job about throwing out day drinkers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so some guy talks to me. He's like, "Hey, you don't look happy." I'm like, and I wasn't feeling any particular way. I'm just a very forbidding looking guy.
Yeah.
I trade on my appearance, as I say. And I said, "No, I'm just contented. It's all good. Happiness is finding a $20 bill." And I was able to witness to him in the end a bit, but he kind of had this idea that God wanted us to be happy. But to me, it's like I'm not going to be smiling and happy all the time. Sometimes I like a good tragedy. Not that I told him that. I'm changing the story a bit for you. Sometimes I actually like watching like Julius Caesar or Macbeth or Othello, something like that. It grinds down into there, And some tragedies are excellent because they remind you that the people who ferment these tragic happenings, get put to get
Mhm.
have to pay for it. Like I tell people, you know, about XYZ subject, well, if they escape punishment in this world, they won't escape punishment in the next. And so having them, work their evil, which is a very real thing, and then get punished for it, as they often do in tragedies when everyone gets murdered, according to the, transpiring domino effect of events. It puts the warmth into my heart.
Mhm. Yeah, an interesting thing to think about with tragedy too is that a popular mode is I don't have a word for it. Like anti-tragic, it's a subversion of tragedy, something like a Nicholas Sparks book, where it's like bad things happen to good people. The end. That's not tragedy in the classic mode,
No.
which is somebody who is maybe good makes bad mistakes or has a moral failing and then suffers the consequences of that. If you're looking at tragedy of Julius Caesar, it's not Julius Caesar's hubris; it's Brutus's hubris. It's really the tragedy of Brutus because Caesar
That's
dies in
right.
the second act. But it's his hubris and his ambition basically convince him to do something very immoral, murder his friend, and the end result is that he suffers a massive downfall as a result of that. Um, Shakespeare understood that, and that kind of form goes back even to like the Greeks. But what we have now in the modern version is I really just want to write a story that like gut punches you and where bad things just happen, the end, because life is like that. It's like, well, I mean, there are bad things that end lives, right? It is often sucks when people die and people often die in bad ways, but that's not like those sorts of deaths are not purposeless. Um, really at all, or nor are they tragic. Like if you die surrounded by loved ones, that's not like a tragic death. It's unfortunate, but you haven't had a downfall because you did something wrong, because you were afflicted with a disease. And that's Fulbert in King Leper, right? He's afflicted with a disease. He's not suffering a downfall because of a moral failing. Rather, it's about a triumph of overcoming um, really bad circumstances for everyone involved. And there's actually a flip side to that too, which is what I call kind of the muted victory, which is like you achieve victory, but it's not always total. It's kind of like the end of Lord of the Rings, where and this happens in Water of Awakening. You succeed, but things often can't be retrieved the way that they were, and you have to figure out how to repair things and move forward for the denouement, to reconcile everything.
Oh yeah. It's I'm always very encouraged through personal tragedy that the ending of the Christian, oh, on this world, oh, it's a sigh, it's a breath, we labor for our bread. But in reality, every Christian death, is a triumph. It's the enemy has lost once we, enter into heaven, once we have the blood of Jesus Christ on us. It ruins what would be a pointless death, and instead sort of create something where you may lose family members, but all Christian family members will be reunited in the end. You know, it's how do I want to put it? Like the Greeks, when they invented tragedy, they had no real hope of that.
Mhm.
It was, you go down to Hades and there's Achilles, and he's like, oh, if only I was a slave in the least king's court, or
Yeah.
whatever he says. He says something like that. But in reality, we're all sons of the king and we're at the marriage supper of the Lamb, and it's,
Mhm.
I don't know,
And
it's, yeah.
the other thing about suffering from the Christian perspective too, and this is something particularly Catholic, which is you are united to Christ in his suffering. Like your suffering unites you to Christ because Christ suffered. There's no indignity or pain that Christ did not suffer. So the idea, this idea like, well, God wants us to be happy. It's like God endured torment, you know. So whatever suffering you have endured, Christ has also endured. So the Catholic idea of giving your suffering to Christ, you're united to Christ's suffering on the cross, The end of your life is not a like a vanquishment, but a victory, just as Christ's death on the cross was not a vanquishment, not a defeat, but a victory over death. So, those things all go together from the Christian perspective. It's not like a bad things happen for no reason. The end.
Then you die. A vampire randomly walks into your small town. Everyone dies.
All right. So Lumos says, given what Wind and Truth light are like looks like, that's the most stellar recommendation for Crown Aside I've heard. Like that, it's the end of a Brandon Sanderson novel. That's kind of what inspired it. Was actually uh, Words of Radiance, the second book in the Stormlight Archive series. Words of Radiance had things happened in the first 100 pages. Then there was pretty much 800 pages of nothing. Then a bunch of stuff happened for the last like 100 pages. And you got a couple of revelations. There was some action. A couple things changed. And when I finished that book, I was like, that's one of the worst fantasy books I've read. And that's following Way of Kings, which was one of the best fantasy books I've read. And the reason I realized it was bad is like the prose is not necessarily bad. There's just a lot of wasted space because Kaladin was at a certain point. In order for the series to continue, we have to knock him down, which is annoying. Like, why is he going backwards? That just doesn't feel like something he would do. Like the characters felt like they were acting a little bit out of their normal range for virtually the entire book so that they could then turn around, have a little personal resolution, and then you could have the action that actually moves the overall plot of the series forward in the last 100 pages. If you just cut out the middle 600 pages, what you'd have is a mid-length fantasy novel that would be pretty good. It would be a pretty good mid-length fantasy novel, maybe even great. But there's just a lot of wasted space in it. And he continued that with the next one, in my opinion. I don't hate Brandon Sanderson. In some ways, I consider myself a fan. I've liked a lot of books by him. But as he's gotten on with his career, the books have gotten long. It's Robert Jordan syndrome.
Right.
The books have gotten longer and less is happening in them every single time.
His editor is afraid to edit him, it sounds like.
It could be that, right? Like, you can't edit Brandon Sanderson. He's too big to edit.
Send me in. I do not care.
And Lumos also says, we're still waiting for the UK to be added to the countries on Kickstarter. I'm still debating adding it. I mean, I can add it, but the shipping is going to be like $50 or $60. And that's just because of the low volume. If you were shipping a large quantities, there's ways that you can get through with volume and make it, 5 or 10 pounds. But it's like, once you have to think that there's tariffs because it's a sold product. Right. And then there's like VAT tax. There's all this extra stuff that gets added on through customs. And then you have to wait for customs to open it up probably and look through it and be like, this is not cocaine. Now you may have the book. Right. I checked it out for Greece. I'm like, how cheap can I get something to Greece? And the lowest I could get it down to was like $96. I had this problem trying to ship something to someone in New Zealand. They're like, can you ship that to me? I'm like, the only way I could ship it to you is like for $50. Right, which is just not probably worth it to you, right? But
sorry, like I have English relatives, and it's like it's more efficient for us just to take the trip to England than it is to like ship things to each other that isn't smaller than a box that could crush a toddler. Like it's crazy.
There you go. And the U.S. Postal Service has a special thing for shipping textbooks, right? And they ship it in a giant bag, right? And I'm like, I'm not shipping the signed hardback in a bag, right? It's got to be shipped nice. But like, you could ship a giant bag of books back for like $50, which is really convenient. It's mostly for international students. But there's not really like a media mail option for international shipping. It gets bogged down. And the reason I didn't add international shipping on this Kickstarter is I got some good feedback and advice from people who have lost money on their Kickstarters. So I'm not going to say who, but he lost money on a Kickstarter, even though he way blew past his goals because the international shipping, surprise, surprise, every book that he had to ship internationally cost him all of the profits for like 6 or 7 books domestically. Because you charge, even if you charge a modest amount, you're like, oh, it's be €10, right? All of a sudden it's like, but this, for whatever reason, to this country, it's 45 euros. And this country, it's 70 euros because of weird taxes and import tariffs they have. It gets
I don't
really,
get it. We're the
yeah,
seat of the empire. They should be paying us to import into
yeah.
them. Ugh.
People who
Ugh.
do it at scale have ways of getting around it. That's probably just beyond my means. And maybe as I become more experienced, I'll figure out cheaper ways to ship stuff internationally.
Well, they have a whole office, and then a lot of these things have like contracts. Like some of the really big names have contracts that are super old, like older than either of us. That
Yeah.
guarantee some crazy amount of cheapness that we just can't match.
Yep.
So they slap on a new cover. Oh, it's a product of Germany,
Mhm.
and then it goes on, and it's usually just a worse cover. I don't get it. I don't
Yeah,
get
that's
it,
the
David.
thing that, and in domestically here in the U.S., that's actually been a contentious thing. Guitars are actually an example. If you pick up a Fender guitar, I don't think I have. Well, I guess that one's technically a Fender, the Hello Kitty guitar. If you pick up a Fender guitar, it'll just say Corona, California on it. It won't say made in USA. Why? Because there's a bunch of components that aren't made in the USA. And so it becomes contentious. How can you say this is made in the USA when the bridge is made in Japan and this part's made in Germany and the rest of the stuff is made in China? You can't, right? It's assembled in the USA. And even then it may not be, right? Like this part or that part may be made somewhere else. The tuners are made in Taiwan. They're just made all over because of the efficiency for it. So you can it just says Corona, California now instead of made in USA. Um, the way that you can get physical copies of my books in Europe is probably to order them from Amazon because then they're printed in the EU and all that stuff happens on that side. It's the same. It's the same thing that happens if you have tariffs. What Donald Trump was saying, right? If you have tariffs, then they'll open facilities here to make the things here to avoid the tariff. It's like that's what we already do in Europe, right? You just use a printer in Europe rather than shipping
Yep.
it overseas because then you don't have to pay all the tariffs.
Oh yeah, yeah. I already
Yeah,
said about
designed
the
in
shipping stuff.
California. That's the one
Yeah.
you always pick it up. You always pick it up. It says designed in California. And then you're like, but where is it made? It's like,
Mhm. What do you mean,
yeah,
made?
yeah.
Uh,
Well,
that's how do you even have a ship of Theseus when you're questioning whether the ship is even a ship? You
yeah.
know.
Sticker placed in the USA. Now, Rumble has a point. There's another guitar one, which is, I think it's called Traeger guitars. They're always advertising like easy play guitars. So what they do is they have guitar. They say that their guitars are American, but the people figured out it's like this is not. I'm pretty sure this was made in Korea, right? So they get a guitar that's made internationally, like Korea or Indonesia, let's say, and they bring it in. They put a new bridge on it and a new nut, and they set it up right. They change a couple things on the guitar that they bought, and
Right.
then they quadruple the price and sell it as made in America. And they put a new sticker like on the inside of the guitar because these factories they make guitars for a million different brands. If you buy an Ibanez, it's made in the same factory as an LTD, as a Fender, and this now a Fender, I think. I don't remember. Fender started making some overseas
Sure.
besides the Squires. But anyway, that's like guitar stuff. But it's just an example.
Yeah, like I did worked in a gym warehouse for quite some time, and it'd be like, oh, this was made here, this was made there, and like I look at the price, and there's no way this wasn't made in a Chinese sweatshop. There
Yeah.
were two live leak videos filmed making this gym equipment. There's no, you know, like given what we know about taxes and stuff like that, the only one I saw was honest was like Watson, where it was like he couldn't sell them in the U.S. for less than like $3,000, and they were English forged pieces supposedly, unless for some reason my boss decided to ship them. Like they shipped it in from China, then my boss shipped it to St. Louis. It's like
Hmm.
okay, we do have some comments. I'll go over some real quick. Aaron Van Treek says, sorry, David. Not that we're done. I just didn't want too much time to pass.
Sure.
I saw your Kickstarter a few days ago, but I blew my monthly hobby budget on Jaji's Kickstarter. That's the Art of Writing Romance.
Yeah, I backed that one.
Oh
So,
yes,
you know,
she's great.
and even if you're not into writing genre romance, right? Having romance subplots is very popular in writing, so it's good to know how those work.
Oh yeah. I'm telling him to be irresponsible, though, just so you know I've got your back. Bradford Walker commenting on what I said about Brandon Sanderson's editor probably being scared to edit Brandon Sanderson. Editors are to authors as trainers are to athletes. The best of them remember that their client is just a man and not too big to train.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. I remember I've seen some videos where it was he was like Schwarzenegger's rival for Mr. Olympia. And, he was training people. And, it was just a whole bunch of videos about him basically having to, not exactly humble the guys, but, make sure they understand that their, place in the world and not to overdo things or blow themselves out just for, one moment of glory, but to create, a body that will last, well, the lifetime. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, and I think for my advice to a lot of people who are creatives is, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We have this grind culture that tells people that they just got to grind all the time. They got to be staying up all night, working hard. And I stay up too late a lot and I work hard, but like anything that you use to try to shorten that time, you could pay for it later on, right?
Oh yeah.
Using crystal meth to stay up all night to like finish your book is going to have bigger consequences further down the line. So It's better to just have a good pace that you can maintain and it goes,
Oh yeah. Like it's like people point to Stephen King and his, workaholism or his uh alcohol and crack habits and all this other stuff. And it's also like, yeah, but if you look at the stories, quite a few of them are bloated. Quite a few of them have weird things in it. And I'm not just talking about the ending of it. I'm pretty sure I know how he justified it. He said something about children becoming adults, leaving the world of imagination, so the imaginary scary nightmare monster doesn't eat them anymore, or something stupid to that regard. He was certainly high when he said it. I'm unfortunately not. I am just tired and sober. It's horrible, David. It's horrible. So it's like, whatever justification your story could have, you bang out, whatever, doesn't even remember Cujo.
He doesn't remember writing that.
Yeah. So it's like, sure, but like, and since he's got off of crack, and alcohol and all this stuff, he's been a lot less like the only novel, modern quote unquote Stephen King novel that has a movie adaptation, I think, is Doctor Sleep. I'm pretty sure that's the newest piece of his that has a movie adaptation. So it's like he doesn't even have the same influence once he's now sober, still doing this, making cringy political statements, all this other stuff. So it's like, you grind, you put the stuff out, it's everything for the book. And then, you're just a used up dry husk who doesn't have the creativity.
So Stephen King is interesting because I think his, if you listen to him or read him, like you can read On Writing, his little writing memoir, his daily word count is fairly modest. When he was producing most of his books that we think of as, he was writing only 2,500 words a day, which is actually pretty modest. Walter B. Gibson, that's the pen name, obviously, of who created The Shadow, would write like 10,000 words a day. That's before there were word processors and stuff too. So there were highly, highly, highly productive writers that like blow Stephen King out of the water in terms of productivity. Robert Jordan famously wrote the tie-in novel to Conan the Destroyer over his spring break. He was an English teacher, so he wrote it in a week. Michael Moorcock would write books over the weekend. So there are writers that write really fast and still write really well because they're just really good. But Stephen King has so many books because he's just been very consistent. All the other chaos that's going on, the drugs, whatever else, right? For most of his career, he's just been very consistent. He just writes 2,500 words a day. As a retired person, he writes 1,500 words a day. That's very manageable. That's 2 hours of work, right? So most people who are hobbyists can work for an hour or two, write 1,000 words. If you write 1,000 words a day, that's 365,000 words a year. That's actually three large novels, 3 novels as big as these novels drafted per year. Now you still have to edit them and stuff like that. But, people thinking Stephen King is just like some monster who pumps out crap. It might be crap, but his like, his pacing is pretty modest by the standards I look at. There's indie guys now who put out a book a month.
Yeah. I don't think the quality can be maintained, and I've read enough of them that I just simply don't need to read anymore. I'm good. You know, you're a friend in the industry. Please don't ask me my opinion on your books.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. I will, like I keep a very strong friend enemy distinction. I'm promising your books. By the way, I love Zool. By the way, Raindrops is my favorite environmental piece that you've made so far. Where it's like it just sounds like I believe it's called Raindrops. I just look up Zool and then I remember what the image is and I click on it. I'm a very plebeian music enjoyer.
I have a bunch of live videos now where I'm like on my porch and it's raining, like it'd be a Texas downpour, and I'll be improvising music. So this last phase of the project, I'm coming up to 100 improvisations over the last year and some change.
Yeah.
And I took a little break because I want the last ones. I think I'm on 96 or something. I want the last couple ones to be a little bit different, and just so I'm not repeating myself. I don't want to make the same kind of song every single time I sit down with a guitar or a synth or something.
Yeah.
So I'll be hopefully working up to something big for 100. I have something big planned for it. Right now I'm focusing also just on promoting the Kickstarter. I just want to I'm doing a content blitz this month. If anyone's kind of wants an insight into what I do in terms of YouTube and social media stuff, what I've learned is maybe a more optimal way to do it is, you can be consistent, put out a video a week. That's what a lot of people will go through. Hey, you got to be doing this every week. Put out a video a week. Yeah. That's a great way to grow your channel if that's what you want to focus on. But if you want everything to harmonize, right? You want to do all your content when you have something relevant to sell with that content. So people see the content and they see that there's something that there's there for them to buy. That's why like every video has like a roll, buy my books on Amazon, and it shows a couple books, right? It's like this little animation I set up in OBS. So no matter what, you're just going to be seeing my book covers every single time I make a video. And that's there to encourage people to buy the other products, because as time goes on, it's harder and harder to make a dime with YouTube. So buy a book, maybe there's a book you want to read.
Yeah.
So if you really want to harmonize things, it's like you want to focus. Like what I'm going to do this month is really focus like a laser on doing a bunch of content that I think will be relevant, and selling the book through that content, or selling the Kickstarter through that content. And then we'll just take our foot off the gas when we're done with that, because it's not a time limited campaign or anything. And you will have built up maybe some extra subscribers and some extra views to kind of feed into the next phase that you want to do. And then take your foot off the gas on YouTube. And then maybe I'll do music for a month while I'm working on printing and shipping the books, because there's a bunch of lag time for that. You get the money, print the books, wait for them to be shipped. Then you got to box the books up and you got to ship them, at least for the signed ones. I think for the ones that aren't signed, I can ship them directly. Like, I think I can go straight from the printer to you, no middleman, which will be just save a lot of time and a lot of effort.
Yeah. And it's like, I know for myself, not that I claim to have a important method, to get your novel sold now, But it's like, sometimes I just take the foot off the gas. These short stories will keep, go off. I figured out how to put Bloodborne on my PC, have some fun with something that's in the spirit of what you're doing, and then come back. Like for a short story I'm writing, I struggled with the ending. It's about this cat familiar for a witch, for Jaji's and Christopher Nuttall's Fantastic Schools familiars. And this cat is just vicious. He's friendly to his friends, but he's, like a cat. He still remembers what it's like to hunt and, be a cat. And so, he struggles with this because he sees also the masters eating meat, the masters killing, and he also, sits in on like church. And he, familiars have to understand language. So, of course, he hears things like, oh, the lion will lay down with the lamb. And so he understands that his nature as a cat has changed. So it causes him torment, but it also makes him vicious. And then at the end, what is his thing? Should it be just when he kills this rabies spreading mole? Well, no, like there's a spiritual component to the story I haven't met yet. So I'm like, oh, what do I do? Then I'm sitting in a sauna and I go, he's killed something, he's eating it. And, he meets Aslan, quote unquote. I'm using Jaji's world for Roanoke and Aslan's walking around. Not that anyone knows him. And he goes, he directly questions Aslan and goes, when will this happen? When will I no longer have to kill and eat? I feel that, once I was a cat, I spoke as a cat, but I'm still acting as a cat, even though I now know right from wrong. He doesn't really get an answer except it's just not yet. You have to wait. And, ending a short story on that might be a little weird, right? But at the same time, if the story has certain components to it, you either have to accept that the story has to lock into those components and finish them through no matter what it is. Otherwise, you might create an unsatisfying experience. They might have people who say, okay, the cat killed the rabies spreading mole, but now what? What has he learned? Has he learned anything? He just killed the villain. This isn't like a detective novel where if he kills the mob boss, the problems are over. And even then, most detective novels were never that simple.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea.
Oh yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I have these preen-offs between cats where it's like they're like grooming each other, not looking at each other, and the one that cracks first and talks, is kind of lower status, as surely seen in some cats. Let's see here. We're 45 minutes in. Let's talk a little bit more about your series. We have a few other books, and you said that this King Leper novel is a play within a short story. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's weird, right? At one point they go to an opera. The opera is telling a story from the mythic past, right? As operas often do, like, Wagner operas.
Yeah.
And so Al Shafalda, which is a completely different book, is just telling that story. So I paused in the draft and I wrote a whole nother book. I wrote that book so that I had that whole story told. So they just sort of get a bit of a brief introduction to that story and some of the themes that are in it. And then, King Leper moves on from there with its own story. But if you want to know, hey, I wonder what's the whole story there, well, you can read Al Shafalda and get that. And so anyone who's getting the higher tier of the Kickstarter will get a whole bunch of ebooks. The ebooks for the first two books in the mainline series, plus the ebooks for Crown of Sight, Al Shafalda, Garamesh and the Farmer, which is a little bit related to the whole thing. It's a fairy tale I wrote a long time ago. And I think Wasting Desert, which is an adventure that has some of the characters from one of the characters from Water of Awakening and one of the characters from Needle Ash on this little adventure. And it's actually, I had originally planned it to be part one of a longer book. But I just thought I'd release it kind of as its own little pulp adventure, kind of fantasy horror adventure. And yeah, so you get a whole bunch of extra ebooks with that, with that setup, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
nice and easy.
So I'm kind of weird.
It's
There's a lot of stories that take place in that setting, different times. And
I promise you, I don't have any right to talk, and I think most authors really don't either. Maybe it's confusing for the reader. We're apologizing to the reader, I guess.
Yeah.
I know for Pinkerton's Ghost, it's like a whole bunch of different stories, and I keep a fairly iron fist on plot lines so things don't get away with us, but from us. But it's like, yeah, I'm introducing like stories from outside the detectives. I know for people who are following the YouTube channel, Superversive Radio at YouTube or whatever it is. The next Friday's story, or I'm sorry, I moved to Mondays. Was written by Zach Log the Great, who you may be familiar with, and he wrote a short story about a man who meets the devil in a naval fortress, and is offered a choice to take the coin or to rot away forever. And I think people will really enjoy it because it gets to a certain spiritual heart of the series. Great themes of redemption and such. And it's, when you got this big expansive thing, you're more novel writing, as I understand, because I've seen your stream a few times. You're more novels on more short stories on this stuff, but it's still like once you have these expansive things, and you can add in things like, what I do with Zacklog or what you're doing with your Kickstarter King Leper, and you can do things with that. And explore themes and get these deeper moments. It's not just good versus evil, or a guy in spiky armor bad. It's instead you have these characters in these worlds, and you can. It's hard because it's like since I set Pinkerton's Ghost in modern America, right? I had a church that was rotting. They're about to experience a church split.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of it just being a drama, this character who is, sort of like spiritually aware, half asleep or something like that, perhaps, she's able to feel the pressure inside the church building and building and building. And then, of course, because it's a Pinkerton's Ghost and we can't go 3 episodes without burning something down, she burns down the church. Not really as a spiritual, message, but rather in the sense of like popping a cyst. Lest it burst and corrupt the land around it, with unbelievers, with spiritual darkness and all this other stuff that, as a person who has survived some church splits, it's incredibly unpleasant. Like 30 years on, the church I'm at now still talks about it, because it was just like the pastor basically wanted to leave the church and wanted to burn it down behind him. Like you can do that once I've established the rules of the story. If you open up with just a church burning and it's not like an orc invasion or Vikings or something, nobody's going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah. An interesting thing, I was just reminded of, the English countryside is dotted with all of these ruins of churches. They're actually monasteries, because King Henry shut down all the monasteries, and there was no one there to maintain them. So they all just got destroyed or fell into ruins, or got scavenged for stone. Because that was the thing people used to do, is that if they needed stone to build a house, there's, some old ruin nearby, they just take the stones out of that. So you just see this, and I always found them like a really powerful, powerful image. Caspar David Friedrich used to paint paintings of them, of these dead churches and dead monasteries that have just been left there, and they'll be, the front edifice is still standing, with maybe a couple buttresses, but the windows are all gone, and there's trees growing up through it. It's just sitting there, and no one's ever done anything with it.
I went to Scotland last year, and I saw a castle that had that, um, and there was a church that had fallen into ruin nearby, and it was very much like entering into a fairy tunnel.
Yeah.
Like the ground was rising up to swallow the church
Mhm.
whole,
The church gets
and
swallowed.
there were plants and trees. Oh yeah. Uh, I don't know if you're aware of him, but there's a man by the name of Nathan Hood, who's of our sentiment for a lot of things, and he discussed that the royal crown, I guess, has preserved many of these ruins, but the problem is that it's gotten to the point where it's a burden rather
Mhm.
than preserving the
Yeah.
past. So you're stuck with something and you can't repair the roof. And I'm not even saying modernize the roof. I'm just saying repair the roof without extremely specific materials that you have to get grants for. You can't even just repair your roof with the materials. You have to go through all these steps, and of course wood rot is
Yeah.
setting in, rain rot, um, and it's hard to like what can we do now? At this point, the past is a burden rather than an inspiration, and he didn't really have an answer
Yeah,
for it. But
that's the way a lot of things have gone throughout history. Is that once somebody is no longer using an object or a building, it gets abandoned or discarded. This is a thing in archaeology. Is that most of the things that you find are garbage because the things that were good, it's like, are you going to find many intact knives? Not unless it's part of burial goods. And the reason is because people used knives until they broke, until they were garbage, and then they threw it away, or they turned the handle into a new knife. People used things and didn't throw them in the garbage. So a lot of what you find in archaeological digs are garbage piles, just people's trash. And the ruins are
yep,
buildings that they didn't, they stopped using at some point. Its purpose was lost. They've done excavations of old Roman baths and they found all kinds of evidence of like hearths being built in there. It's like, what is this? They Once the Romans left and people were no longer using the public baths, they stopped filling them with water because it cost too much money and too much effort. And so people started squatting in the old baths. They built little houses and lived inside of them because it was shelter. So you have that sort of decay. And that's actually a strong theme that's in a lot of my books, especially the Eternal Dream books, like the main sequence ones, is that you're in a world that has had ruins multiple times. So you come across things that are virtually forgotten and that the world moves on. The people who use those objects, they depart, and once they're gone, the things that they built with their hands also decay. They're not permanent. There's an impermanence to the world. And in the mythic mode, the original world, things were not impermanent, they were permanent. And as things decay, as the Golden Man decays into the Iron Man, you have the world itself decays. The world becomes mundane. It's not magical. You can't form it from your imagination. Rather, you're building out of building blocks like stone, and those things get worn away. They get decayed by time. They fall into ruins, um, and that becomes a central theme. Is that how do we find this hidden realm? Well, it's in the ruins of this ancient city. How do we find the ruins? The only thing that's left there is maybe like some tumbled stones. Barely any evidence that the thing was ever there because the people who built it moved on. They died, they left, they disappeared from the world. And so the work of their heart it decays into nothing over time. That's a I don't know, that's a big theme that I have in my books is that the passage of time wears things away. People get forgotten. And it wasn't necessarily meant to be that way, but that's the way that people and everything have decayed.
it's true. There's I was talking to a gentleman, and he's like, he had just survived a horrible medical issue, down to the wire. And he's like, well, what do I do with my life? Purposeless, And I basically told him what I hold. Not, I don't know if you call it purpose, but it's purpose enough. You know, uh, it's like, look, even the best authors get forgotten eventually. Because he knows
Mhm.
I'm a writer. You know, like in my grandkids' time, I'll probably be forgotten because I'm not Tolkien. If I was Tolkien, I'd be Tolkien already or something. You know, but it's like, you know, you just don't worry about it. Like you keep like, you know, since I'm sort of an absurdist, you know, I said something like, you know, the stars are dying and yet we dance,
Yeah.
you know, that sort of thing. There was someone else told a funny story about how he worked for a terrible boss with a stripper wife. And I go, do you think the stripper wife worries about her purpose? No. You know, it's stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
what's interesting to think about too when it comes to say, you know, will you be remembered is if you believe in an eternal life, then being remembered in this life is not so critical. It's more important that you live well, right? And that you do things that are moral and that matter in that sense. A lot of the writings that we have, we're really lucky to have because they disappear through time. You know, books were extremely rare in the ancient world. So if there was an event that destroyed books like the, you know, Mount Vesuvius burying the library at Herculaneum, a lot of those books were just gone. Those were the only copies of those books that ever existed. When the library at Alexandria was burned, there were copies that, you know, destroyed manuscripts that was the only copy. A book would have to be good enough for a person, a scribe, to physically copy the book out, which made them very rare. Books are so rare, in fact, that if you look at the total, just the amount of writings made, I believe in the 9th century, the Carolingian Renaissance, there are more writings from the Carolingian Renaissance, the supposed Dark Ages, than all human history before that combined. So you want to think
oh,
about
wow.
how rare ancient manuscripts really are. Like there's all kinds of things that we know existed because they're referenced in histories that we have, but there's not we don't have the manuscript for it. It doesn't exist. That's also an interesting thing about the Bible is that there's no original manuscripts. Like we don't have like the original letters that Paul wrote, like the paper that he wrote on, but we have numerous copies. And so there's more early manuscript copies of the Bible than any other book that has ever existed. Right. It's not,
Oh, yeah.
there's no comparison, the amount of copies that we have, because people took the time to copy and maintain those letters. Really, really important. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're missing. Stoic philosophers, they're rediscovering some of them slowly, because when a Herculaneum was rediscovered, first of all, it was rediscovered, I believe, by shepherds that were burning some of the old papyri that had been charred in the volcanic explosion in the pyroclastic flow as wood. So they might have destroyed things that they're gone forever. But the Catholic Church preserved a lot of these and had come up with various ways to try to unravel these burnt papyri, to copy down what's in them and recover some of these books that had been lost to time. There was a machine that was a monk made at the Vatican that had a silk thread, and it was a machine that would slowly through mechanical, like by deregulating the motion using gears so that it would go very, very, very slowly. You crank it up and it would just super slowly turn. And this thread would pull one layer of the papyrus away from another. And in that, you could see a line of Greek or of Latin, and you could copy it down really quickly. And then the ink would oxidize and disappear. So the only way to recover the words of the text was to have a scribe physically writing down line by line what was on a roll of papyrus as it disappeared to time, because once that charred papyrus was exposed to air, it was gone forever. That's how rare writings are. So now I think it's interesting to think about the future, or like what's going to be canonical of Leibowitz kind of stuff in the future, right? Like
Yeah.
I think digital stuff won't be well preserved. We're already losing a lot
No.
of the digital existence from the early 2000s. I think
Yeah.
having print books will be what preserves things. And libraries are already throwing lots of books away and stuff,
Yeah.
because they have to make room for other books. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to think about.
I know.
Maybe someone will discover your books later, and you'll be the Bach of the 25th century or something. Who knows?
Oh, sure. I know for like William Hope Hodgson, the Nightlands, he's mostly been
Yeah.
forgotten except for the work of John C. Wright and a few others. With
Mhm.
the Bible, I know Catholics and Protestants, argue about certain things being in or out of it and all this jazz. But most of the Bible for the first even 200 years was just a collection of letters that you might just happen to have.
Mhm.
Like I would be completely and utterly flabbergasted if we ever find an actual letter written by Paul. Like I'm reading a book called Spring Snow by Yukiya Mishima, and I've got it in the pocket of my coat, when I have to do like shifts on the parking lot, and it's beaten up. It's being, used to hell and back.
Yeah.
And it's just sitting in my coat until I read it outside. How much more for a simple papyrus letter being sent in one of the more warlike periods of time, as safe as the Roman Empire was. Like we
Mhm.
just like if somebody somehow collected said that they had collected some original manuscripts of the Bible, like there's like snake oil doubting, right? And
Mhm.
then there's whatever I'll be feeling that'll be akin to something like, what do you mean? And that's dumb. And you're stupid. Like it'll be combined to that. I don't know what that emotion is, but it ends with somebody being tarred and feathered.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of numerous copies that survived from the early church, and we find them. There's even
Oh
pocket
yeah.
editions. So you find pocket editions of the gospel,
Oh
things that
yeah.
were designed to be folded up and put in your pocket and read for your own personal devotion. Those things were precious, and so you could really, most churches might have one copy of the things there to read, and that was how it was preserved. But even then, that's a real wealth of books. Even through the medieval period, a lord
Mhm.
might be considered to have a great book collection by having 10 or 12 books
Oh
that
yeah.
people could read. And one of them would be the Bible. And so the only book that a lot of people even owned was a Bible. That because that was,
Mm.
if you were going to buy one book, you would buy the Bible, and that's the book that you would buy, and it would be the family Bible. The whole family would share it because it was very expensive to have a Bible, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
almost a shine. And you can see how much care was put into books back then too. I love it. If you ever go to a museum and can see some illuminated manuscripts, I think they're just so
Beautiful.
cool to look at. I know the Getty in LA has a bunch of medieval manuscripts, because when you're going to be spending a lot of hours copying a book, you put a lot of effort into making sure it's clear, but also doing decorations, making it a real product. That reminds me of something. I'm going to do this, I think, for King Leper. I haven't done it yet, but I'll do it on stream.
A
So
little
King,
illustrated manuscript.
not illuminated. I mean, I could do illustrated. I mean, I've
Well,
toyed
I
with
mean,
it.
I meant illuminated, but yeah,
Yeah,
illustrated's
I've I've
okay.
I've toyed with doing something like that. But all the caps, you can see me kind of in the corner. There's you'll get it.
Hold on,
There's
let me
little
get your.
caps with ravens. I custom made all of the drop caps, so I designed all
Hold
those
on.
myself to have like birds on them. And I might do something like that for King Lepers. Okay, cool. I'm all big.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm all
yeah.
big and red faced
I
here.
wasn't expecting. Excuse me.
By the way, my rosacea is getting a little better for people who are wondering. I got the flu and my face turned red, and I got rosacea from it. My immune system did not like it. All right, so like this H is a one off drop cap I designed, and every chapter has stuff like that
That's
throughout
pretty
the whole
cool.
book. Every single one is different. So I may have some of these. Here's a P with a raven on it. Because there's a couple of ravens. The ravens, by the way, people love the ravens. They're making a comeback in King Leper. So you get the ravens back. The
I love
talking
it.
ravens are back. The familiars.
It's
They're
great.
back.
You've got we'll close out here. You got a great product with King Leper. Probably going to get there's $10. Hold on. Yeah, there's
Is
like
it ebook
$11
tiers?
difference,
Yeah.
between the King Leper signed and unsigned. And quite frankly, with the way the prices for hardbacks are going, like
Yeah.
I might as well, because I bought some of Christopher Ruccio's early works
Oh,
um,
yeah.
before I got like so. Christopher Rucchio is a great guy, lovely man. I absolutely hate the main female character in his Sun Eater series. You don't understand. Like I started foaming at the mouth at one point, and whenever she started speaking, and it's like, wow. I don't expect anything like that with your books. I promise you. But yeah, no, I think I might go in for a signed hardback. $38 plus shipping. I'm sure. I'm in the U.S., so you don't have to worry about catapulting it to England or using one of those high altitude balloons, that they apparently use. So yeah, that sounds good. I'm always happy to support friends' Kickstarters, and quite frankly, just the story, like the way you described it, on stream, it sounds like a great story. I'm gonna really enjoy. Um, and as tome as it might be, it sounds like it actually has an end.
Yeah.
So
There's a
why don't you?
definitive end.
Yes.
We will conclude all the conflicts. And that's what I really like to do with a book is I want people when they get to the end to be like, that was good. If I was going to emulate a series that was really like one after the other, it would actually be something like Harry Potter or maybe like the Dresden Files, where every book is a complete story. Yeah, they go in order. But you get to the end of the book and you've concluded a conflict. You don't get to the end of the book and be like, well, what happens next? Which is, I don't know, kind of what happens with a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff these days, because the whole idea is to try to sell somebody on the next book by leaving everything unresolved. And I don't really like to do that. There's always like a couple threads like, well, we'll figure out maybe what'll happen with that next time. But,
Right.
I like
No, you
for
killed the
things
main
to come
villain.
to a
I'm done.
satisfying conclusion.
I'm out. Like you killed the dude in this dark spiky armor who was going to just enslave all mankind. I'm done. I'm out. I don't want to hear your guidance stories. I didn't like half of these characters anyway, sir. Sir.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm trying to leave, but they won't let me. No, but thank you all for coming on. Do you have
Thank you for
anything?
having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. And I offer this publicly to all friends. Let me know when your next Kickstarter is. I know I'll be just project release. I am in like music has never been my talent, but I'm interested in music. And when you release, your grand album, why don't you come on and you can talk shop about music for a bit. I know I'll be having somebody representing Arbogast in for his new return of Patrick Moonlight series, which I think people are really going to love. I love Arbogast. He's probably the best horror writer in America right now. So it's like, friends get a pass, let me know. And I'll be happy to have you on or anyone who might be listening on. David, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
grab King Leper, figure out there's even a library in King Leopard. You get to go to an ancient library. There's opera, there's libraries, there's sword fights, duels.
Stop, I can't take it. I can't take it. It's so good. It's so good. Oh my. What's the term? Oh my goodness. Femme fatales even?
There's no femme fatales.
All right.
The women characters are all pretty virtuous, actually.
Oh, good, because I hate femme fatales. That was a test, David.
Most of the drama is occurring between the male characters.
Very good. All right. Thank you all for coming, and have a